Welcome back viewers, I am Dr. Surbhi Uniyal and we are doing a lecture series on Indian knowledge system. In today's lecture, we are discussing different spiritual traditions in India. We were discussing about Jainism and we discussed that how Jain philosophy talks about removing all the karmic accumulations of the soul through which it rises to the Siddhalok in its pure form. And the path that is involved is through the right faith, right knowledge and right conduct. And along with that, the 5 great vows, that is Ahimsa, Satya, Aste, Brahmacharya and Aparigraha, where Ahimsa means non-violence, Satya means truthfulness, Aste means non-stealing, Brahmacharya means celibacy, Aparigraha means non-possession. The distinctiveness of Jain spirituality lies in uncompromising commitment to Ahimsa as supreme principle. Non-violence extends to all living beings, requiring elaborate precautions. For example, monks wear mouth cloths to avoid inhaling insects, sweep ground before walking, strain water, avoid root vegetables. As we have been talking about that how Jain spirituality emphasizes greatly on ahimsa. So, any act of killing someone, be it the tiniest insect, is considered as hinsa. And to do that, to prevent that, monks take extra precautions to annihilate any kind of hinsa to any being. This reflects understanding that violence generates karmic bondage. Extreme asceticism, that is, for example, wandering without shelter, eating only unsolicited food, periodic fasting, renouncing clothing, for example, digambaras, represent systematic renunciation of attachments binding consciousness. The ultimate practice of the voluntary death through fasting demonstrates soul's sovereignty over embodiment. Now, if we move forward and we talk about other kind of spiritual traditions, in that let's discuss about the Bhakti movement. Bhakti movement represents profound democratization of Indian spirituality, making loving devotion to personal deity the central path, accessible to all regardless of caste, gender or learning. And this tradition, as we will discuss, will talk about how there have been different examples of Bhakti movement that have been discussed in various texts, epics, etc. So, in this spiritual revolution, the divine grace is activated through devotional love, is more powerful than rituals. It's more accessible than the yogic discipline, and it's more certain than philosophical knowledge. The deities in this tradition, for example, Vishnu, Ram, Krishna, Shiv or Devis, are understood as supremely personal reality characterized by beauty, compassion and desire for relationship. The goal shifts from absorption in impersonal absolute to eternal loving relationship with the divine. And it is where the relationship between an individual and the Supreme became more personal than it was earlier. As in the earlier case, it was more impersonal. But in the Bhakti tradition or during the Bhakti movement, this became to be more personal relationships between an individual with the Supreme Self or the Supreme powers and divine. Bhakti spirituality develops rich topologies of devotional relationships. Devotees cultivate towards the divine. Bhagavad Puran describes 5 primary relationships, which are peaceful disposition of sages, dasya, which is servitude as Hanuman serves Ram, sakhya, which is friendship as cowherd boys with Krishna, vatsalya, which is parental affection as Yashoda towards Krishna, and madhuraya, which is romantic love, the gopis' passionate devotion to Krishna. These are the different types of primary relationships between the individual with the Supreme that has been talked about in the Bhagavad Puran, and we have various such examples. Some of them, as we have mentioned now, that how if we talk about the service from the point of view of how Hanuman served Ram, or as a friend, wherein we talked about and have read a lot about cowherd boys with Krishna and their friendship. Parental affection of Yashoda towards Krishna and the romantic love of gopis' passionate devotion to Krishna. Also, we can talk about Radha and Krishna, how their relationship was seen, and about Meera's devotion to Krishna. So, the practices include in this Bhakti tradition, which were like Nam Jap, wherein the divine name repetition, Kirtan, which is congregational singing, contemplation of deities' forms and pastimes, ritual worship, pilgrimage, and cultivation of devotional states, or in a more devotional or emotional states, as we can say. So, these were some of the practices that were central to the Bhakti tradition, wherein Nam Jap has been emphasized, Kirtans have been practiced, contemplation of deities' forms and pastime, ritual worships, they have been emphasized in this kind of tradition. Next, if we talk about another tradition, which is Tantric spirituality. So, emerging around 5th century CE, Tantra reconfigures Indian spirituality by dissolving conventional oppositions between pure and impure, sacred and profane, and liberation and worldly enjoyment. So, this is again a shift we can see in the Tantric spirituality, how they are talking about these conventional oppositions, right? About talking in contrast to liberation, they are talking about worldly enjoyments, from sacred to profane, from pure to impure, and how they have re-emphasized on these opposing ideas. So, rather than treating the body, the senses and desires as impediments, Tantric traditions developed disciplined methods for transforming them into means of awakening. So rather than rejecting the body, the senses and the desires, they have utilized or used these different elements as methods for transforming them through the means of awakening. Grounded in a non-dual ontology in which Shiv, that is consciousness, and Shakti, which is energy, are ultimately identical. Tantra understands the body as a microcosm of the universe that contains latent cosmic powers. Through systematic practice, these forces are activated towards liberation, shifting the emphasis from gradual purification to direct recognition and from renunciation to transformation. So, we can see that how grounded in non-dual ontology, in which consciousness and the energy are considered to be identical. So, tantras or tantric tradition, they understand body as a microcosm of the universe, and this being a microcosm of the universe, they contain latent cosmic powers. So, through systematic practice, these forces are activated towards liberation and shifting the emphasis from gradual purification to direct recognition, and from, as mentioned earlier, from renunciation to transformation, that is what they are emphasizing upon. So, tantric practice integrates multiple interrelated disciplines. Like mantra employs sacred sounds as a conduct of divine energy, or coordinated with visualization, regulated breath and focused attention. Mandala meditation uses structured geometric forms as symbolic representation of the cosmic order. Mudra, which is ritual gestures, and nyas, which is consecrated placement of mantras on the body. They inscribe cosmic principles onto the practitioner, sacralizing the body as divine form. Visualization practices involved the detailed mental constructions of deities, culminating in identification with the visualized forms. These are the different ways in which we can talk about these different practices that they have adopted. Moving next to Shaivism and Shaktiism, and how these different traditions they talk about spirituality. So now if we talk about Shiv tradition, they worship Shiv as supreme reality, but Shiv's spiritual meaning extend beyond the anthropomorphic deity to multiple dimensions of ultimate reality. For example, Shiv appears simultaneously as ascetic, yogi, absorbed in meditation, cosmic dancer like Nataraj, creating and destroying worlds, formless Ninga, which is representing generative power, householder married to Parvati, fierce destroyer of demons, and pure consciousness beyond form. This multiplicity reflects spiritual insight that ultimate reality cannot be captured in single image. And that's how there are different ideas that or different perspectives that have been associated with the image of Shiv. So it's not one, but it's multitude. It's seen in these different ways because these multiplicity, they reflect spiritual insights, and that ultimate reality, it cannot be captured in single image. Kashmir Shaivism teaches that pure consciousness simultaneously manifests the universe through innate freedom and creative vibration, with realization involving recognizing one's true nature as identical with Shiv, and that is the Kashmir Shaivism, if we briefly mention about. Now, if we move further, we can talk about Shaktiism, which elevates feminine divine principle as supreme, worshipping goddesses, devis, shaktis as ultimate reality and encompassing all other deities as her forms. So, Devi Mahatmya narrates how Devi defeats demons threatening cosmic order, establishing her as Mahadevi, who creates, preserves and destroys the universe. So, we can see that how the emphasis here in Shaktiism is concentrated on the feminine divine, and every other form of deities are considered to be her forms. So, the spiritual significance lies in recognizing power, energy and dynamic creativity as ultimate nature of reality. Devi appears in multiple forms. For example, Durga, the warrior goddess, Kali, the fierce form representing time and transformation, Lakshmi, goddess of prosperity, Saraswati, goddess of knowledge, Parvati, the benevolent mother, and 10 Mahavidyas represent increasingly esoteric aspects of Shakti, and that is how different multiple forms of feminine supreme has been mentioned. Now, let us shift our attention to Sufism. Sufism, the mystical tradition of Islam, has significantly shaped Indian spirituality through its interaction with local religious practices. At its core, it is the process of fana, that is the dissolution of the ego, and in the sense of abiding in God, pursued through disciplines such as the reverence to God and the devotional music. Also, the guidance under the spiritual teacher and movement through recognized spiritual stages. And these are the core processes that are involved if we talk about spirituality from the Sufi tradition. So, in the Indian context, Sufism absorbed elements of indigenous traditions, including yogic breathing techniques, meditation practices, pilgrimage to saint shrines, and the uses of regional languages in devotional poetry. These were the emphasis of Sufism, and that is where we can find their spiritual traditions underlying these various practices. The next tradition is Sikhism. So, Sikhism, founded by Guru Nanak, its spiritual course centers on meditation on Naam, that is the divine name, understood as a sense of formless divine reality, which is Nirankar. So, the Nitnem involves prescribed daily prayers, structuring the day around spiritual remembrance. Sikhism emphasizes householder path over renunciation, rejecting caste distinctions and affirming women's spiritual equality, combining meditation with active service, that is seva. And that is how Sikh tradition has emphasized on these various practices to see them in these spiritual dimensions, that how their emphasis on the householder path over renunciation, how they reject caste distinctions, how they affirm women's spiritual equality, which has been or might have been neglected in the other traditions. But here they have given equal spiritual quality to all genders, and they also combine the meditative practice, which is that of seva. The Khalsa represent committed Sikhs accepting specific disciplines, including the 5 Ks. The spiritual ideal is Saint Sipahi, which is a saint soldier, combining inner devotion with courage to defend righteousness. And this is something very important in these traditions, that how they are looking for inner devotion, but this inner devotion with courage to defend the righteousness. And that is why the term itself talks about saint soldiers, Sant Sipahi, that how they are combining this inner devotion with courage to defend the righteousness. So, if we conclude this lecture about how spirituality has been seen in Indian life, we can say that Indian civilization, they have distinctively emphasized on spirituality as organizing framework to understand existence and pursuing human fulfillment. Unlike cultures compartmentalizing religion as one domain among others, Indian traditions view spirituality as foundation from which other disciplines or other domains derive meaning. So, it is not something which is isolated, which is a different discipline altogether, but in Indian tradition, spirituality, religion and philosophy are in some sense, though there are differences between them, but in some sense they correlate with each other depending on how individual leads his life, because it is more experiential, and being experiential, these are seen not seen as compartmentalized but interrelated concepts. So, this reflects recognition that consciousness itself is primary datum of existence, and transformation of consciousness represents the most fundamental form of knowledge. And we have seen in this lecture also, we have tried to discuss that how all the traditions or all the spiritual traditions in Indian context have in some way or the other talked about consciousness, talked about the idea of self. So, that becomes a primary datum of existence, and also of how this can be seen as a transformative journey, how it can be seen in a more experiential way. So, these are not the rules that are abstract, or these are not philosophies that are in abstractions, but these are very much in line with how we experientially understand and practice these traditions, be it religious, spiritual or philosophical traditions. And all these different traditions have basically emphasized on these aspects, but in different ways depending on their individual practices, rituals and philosophies, and how each one of them is talking about some kind of transformation or is seen as a realization. So, the multiplicity of paths reflects these sophisticated understanding that different practitioners, they require different approaches, yet all point towards the similar recognition, that is the pervasive influence of spirituality shapes Indian arts, sciences, literature and ordinary life through rituals, daily practices and festivals. That how these influence of spirituality can be seen in these different aspects, in these different domains, be it art, sciences, literature, festivals, our daily practice, how it is already embedded in all these different domains. So, Indian civilization thus represents humanity's most sustained attempt to construct culture around primacy of spiritual transformation and quest for ultimate truth through disciplined investigation of consciousness itself. With this, we end our lecture on Indian knowledge system, talking about different spiritual traditions in India. Thank you so much.